Some cars were so badly designed, dangerously flawed, or legally scandalous that they didn't just fail, they were effectively banned. Whether pulled from the market by regulators, recalled into oblivion, or quietly erased by embarrassed automakers, these cars cross the line of public safety, environmental standards, or basic mechanical sanity. You may not remember them, and the car companies would prefer it that way. These are 10 ultra-banned American cars that you won't believe were ever real.
Dear viewer, don't forget to subscribe to the channel. Thanks for your support.
Number 10. In 1968, Dodge was deep into the muscle car wars. The Coronet RT and Charger 440 were already tearing up the streets. And the Dodge Dart, typically a compact commuter, had been transformed with the GTS trim into a performance car in its own right, offering a 340 or 383 V8. But there was a version that never made it into official production, a version so powerful and unruly that Chrysler itself refused to approve it, the Dodge Dart GTS 440. Officially, this car didn't exist, but in reality, a handful were created by dealers or Mopar insiders, unleashing one of the most dangerous and unhinged muscle compacts of the era. In 1968, Dodge launched the GTS, Gran Turismo Sport model, as a response to the popularity of compact performance cars like the Nova SS and Barracuda Formula S. The GTS package included performance suspension, upgraded trim, optional 340 or 383 cubic inch V8s, floor-shifted torque flight or 4-speed manual. The GTS was quick and agile, but some Mopar fans and dealers wanted more, specifically the massive 440 big block V8. The 440 Magnum was Chrysler's top big block engine at the time, producing 375 horsepower and over 480 pound-feet of torque in stock form. It was a torque monster used in the Charger RT, GTX, and Coronet. Chrysler engineers refused to put it in the Dart, citing packaging issues. The engine bay was too narrow and required custom headers, modified steering linkages, and extra cooling. Balance problems. With so much weight up front, the car's handling suffered tremendously. Liability. The Dart GTS 440 would blow away most competitors, but would also overwhelm its brakes and chassis, creating a potential legal nightmare. So, officially, Dodge never built a factory 440 Dart GTS in 1968. That didn't stop enterprising dealers and performance shops. Dodge dealers like Grand Spalding Dodge, Chicago, and Mr. Norm's took delivery of stock Dart GTS 383s. They swapped in 440 Magnum engines, often with factory or aftermarket headers, beefed up suspensions, and reinforced cooling systems. These cars were sold as new, but with the understanding that Chrysler would not honor the factory warranty. These dealer-swapped Darts were street terrors, blisteringly fast in a straight line, running low 13-second quarter miles with minimal tuning. Certified the Dart GTS 440 for emissions, advertised it in brochures, offered it through official factory order sheets. They considered it a rogue combination, though internally they did test a few prototypes. However, the liabilities were deemed too high, especially with growing insurance concerns and federal oversight. Ironically, Chrysler would later approve the even wilder 1969-70 Dart Swinger 440 and Barracuda 440, but only in extremely limited numbers, and mostly for drag racing homologation. The 1968 Dart GTS 440 remains a rare piece of Mopar mythology. Only a few dozen are believed to have been dealer-swapped in period. Survivors today are often clones, with real-deal examples fetching premium prices. It stands as one of the most insane street sleepers of the late 1960s, a compact car with a full-size engine. Its legend lives on among collectors and drag racers, who view it as a true outlaw muscle car, born not from corporate strategy, but from enthusiast rebellion. The 1968 Dodge Dart GTS 440 is one of the boldest what-ifs of the muscle car era. It was too powerful, too unbalanced, and too dangerous for official release, but just right for those who wanted a fire-breathing, tire-smoking V8 brick. It's a perfect example of the enthusiast spirit of the late 60s, when performance mattered more than rules, and when dealers were just as wild as the customers they served. Number 9. By 1974, the American muscle car era was on life support. Insurance premiums had soared, federal emissions regulations were tightening, and gas prices were on the rise. Most manufacturers were quietly detuning or discontinuing their performance models. But Pontiac refused to go quietly. With the 1974 Trans Am SD 455, Pontiac unleashed one of the most powerful and controversial street-legal engines ever to come from Detroit. A brute that barely snuck past the EPA and was banned from sale in several states due to emissions violations. This car became a mythic figure, too fast for its time, too dirty for its era, and too rare to be forgotten. The Super Duty 455, SD 455, wasn't just a bored-out engine, it was a racing motor in street clothing. Key features: displacement, 455 cubic inches, 7.5 liters. Horsepower, 290 horsepower, SAE net, but unofficially much higher. Torque, 395 pound-foot. Forged crankshaft and connecting rods. Special high-nickel block. 4-bolt main bearing caps. Unique camshaft and aluminum intake. This was not a slightly warmed-over street motor. This was a factory race engine, purpose-built to push the limits of legality. Originally developed for Trans Am racing, Pontiac found a loophole to sell it in limited numbers to keep its performance image alive. It was installed in select 1973 and 1974 Trans Ams and Formulas. The 1974 Trans Am received several updates, including revised front bumper to meet new 5 mph crash standards. Screaming Chicken hood decal remained, now bigger than ever. Revised rear tail lamp panel. Optional manual or turbo-hydromatic 400 automatic transmission. Performance with the SD 455 was brutal for the era. 0 to 60 miles per hour in under 6 seconds. Quarter mile in the mid-13s with minor tuning. Faster than almost anything else available new at the time. Compared to smog-choked rivals, the SD 455 was a monster in a dying class. Despite efforts to keep it road legal, the Super Duty 455 walked a razor-thin line with the EPA. It was fitted with a rudimentary EGR system and emissions controls, but it barely passed federal tests. In some states, especially California and the Northeast, the SD 455 could not be sold or registered. Why? It failed local emissions regulations stricter than the federal baseline. California's Air Resources Board, CARB, refused certification of the SD 455 for sale. Even if someone got one registered, it was often flagged at inspection or denied renewal unless modified. As a result, Pontiac quietly canceled the engine after 1974, with some leftovers installed in early 75 cars. The planned SD 455 for 1975 was officially killed due to the inability to meet upcoming emissions and noise requirements. Only 943 Trans Ams were built with the SD 455 in 1974, 700 with automatic, 193 with 4-speed manual. That makes it one of the rarest and most desirable muscle cars ever produced by GM. Pontiac also offered it in limited numbers in the Firebird Formula trim, making those cars even more obscure. The SD 455 is often considered the last true big block performance engine of the muscle car era, the final gasp of pre-smog brute force.
a symbol of Pontiac's defiance in the face of regulation. Though its life was short, the SD455 became a legend among collectors, racers, and Mopar haters alike. It was Pontiac's middle finger to the muscle car crackdown, and it lives on as a shining moment of resistance in a decade full of compromises. The 1974 Pontiac Trans Am SD455 was never officially banned nationwide, but the fact that it couldn't be sold or registered in key states effectively made it a limited-access outlaw car. It wasn't just a muscle car, it was a challenge to the regulatory future. It proved that even as the lights dimmed on Detroit performance, Pontiac could still burn rubber with the best of them, even if only for one more year. It is, perhaps, the most fearless and forbidden Pontiac.
Number 8. By 1977, the American automotive landscape was changing fast. Full-size cars were being downsized, emission standards were tightening, and fuel economy was the name of the game. Amid all this, Chevrolet quietly offered one last nod to brute force performance: the 9C1 police package Impala with a 454 cubic inch V8. This wasn't your average Impala. It was a fleet-only beast, a throwback to the muscle car days, built specifically for high-speed police pursuit. But due to its emissions output, fuel consumption, and sheer power, this 9C1 version was never certified for civilian sale in several states, and remains one of the rarest full-size police sedans ever built. The 9C1 code signified a factory-installed law enforcement package: stronger suspension, reinforced cooling, upgraded brakes, and high-performance powertrains designed to handle the demands of emergency services. For 1977, the 9C1 Impala was available with 350 CID V8, 400 CID V8, and the top dog 454 CID V8, only for police use. This final option was almost secretive, as the 454 was not listed in regular sales literature and was limited to special order law enforcement applications only. The 454 had already made its name in muscle cars like the Chevelle SS and Corvette, but by 1977 it was a dinosaur. Powerful, yes, but increasingly incompatible with the era's emissions mandates. Key specs for the 1977 Police 454 V8. Displacement: 454 cubic inches, 7.4 liters. Horsepower: somewhere around 245 horsepower net. Torque: 375 plus lb-f. Carbureted setup with high-flow exhaust and heavy-duty cooling. It was built for speed, acceleration, and highway pursuit, not fuel economy or emissions. It offered performance numbers far beyond any typical police cruiser of the time. Despite its capability, the 454 Impala 9C1 ran into major legal and environmental hurdles. The engine did not meet emissions certification in several states, especially California, which had already outlawed many large displacement engines by 1975. It was never offered to the public due to fuel economy standards under the Corporate Average Fuel Economy (CAFE) regulations. Some jurisdictions refused to register 454-equipped vehicles unless they were clearly marked as fleet or government use. In essence, while not officially banned, the 454 9C1 was functionally restricted from civilian ownership in large swaths of the U.S. 1977 was the final year Chevrolet offered a 454 in a full-size sedan. After that, the downsized Caprice and Impala could no longer accommodate the big block V8 without expensive redesigns and emissions headaches. The 9C1 sedan faded into obscurity. Almost all were used and abused by police departments, then scrapped. Very few were preserved, and even fewer ever escaped into civilian hands. Today, surviving examples are extremely rare collector's items, often mistaken for standard Impalas, but hiding serious muscle under the hood. The 1977 Chevrolet Impala 9C1 454 stands as one of the last big block police sedans ever built. It bridged the gap between the muscle car era and the modern patrol cruiser. It reminded the public and suspects that some police departments still had serious horsepower at their disposal. And it marked the end of an era when raw power was a tool of public safety, even if the laws of pollution and fuel economy finally caught up. The 1977 9C1 Impala with the 454 V8 was too dirty, too thirsty, and too fast for the changing rules of American roads. Though technically legal on a federal level, it was blocked by state emissions rules, barred from civilian sale, and quietly dropped after 1 year. In an era dominated by downsizing and compromise, this forgotten monster served as a final roar from the muscle car age, and today it stands as a ghostly symbol of power the public was never allowed to buy. Number 7. By 1976, the American car industry was deep into the era of personal luxury coupes. These were big, heavy, two-door vehicles aimed at offering style and comfort, but some still clung to the muscle-era tradition of stuffing the largest V8s under the hood. One of the boldest examples was the Ford Gran Torino Elite, a car that tried to be both elegant and intimidating, especially when ordered with the massive 460 cubic inch V8. But in the nation's most influential car market, California, that top engine choice would disappear without fanfare. The reason? New emission standards that the 460 V8 couldn't meet. The Elite was originally known simply as the Gran Torino Elite when it debuted for the 1974 model year, Ford's answer to the Chevrolet Monte Carlo and Chrysler Cordoba. By 1975, the Gran Torino part of the name was quietly dropped, and the car was simply marketed as the Ford Elite. However, the platform and mechanical underpinnings remained shared with the Ford Torino and the LTD2. Notable characteristics: long hood, short deck styling, hidden headlights, opera windows and vinyl roof, plush interiors with simulated wood grain, shared Ford midsize chassis, and at the top of the engine lineup was the Ford 460 CID V8, the largest engine Ford had in passenger cars. The 460 cubic inch V8, 7.5 liters, was a carryover from the muscle car days. It was known for its massive low-end torque, smooth power delivery, dependable highway cruising ability. 1976 460 V8 specs: approximately 202 horsepower at 4,000 RPM, 353 pound-feet of torque, 4-barrel carburetor, grossly detuned compared to its early 70s peak. Despite these modest numbers by modern standards, the engine still guzzled fuel and, even more importantly, pushed the limits of emissions compliance. By the mid-1970s, California had the strictest automotive emissions laws in the United States, enforced by the California Air Resources Board. The 460 V8, even with catalytic converters and air injection, struggled to meet those limits. In 1916, the Elite was still offered nationally with the 460 V8. California buyers, however, were silently blocked from ordering it. Dealers were told not to accept orders for 460-equipped cars in CARB states. Some 460 Elites were shipped illegally or by error, but those were rare. Instead, buyers were limited to the 400 or 351 CID V8s, both of which had been re-engineered with leaner fuel mixtures and detuned spark curves to meet emissions. The 1966 model year was the last hurrah for the Elite and, by extension, the last opportunity to pair it with a 460 V8. Ford canceled the Elite name after 1916, merging its styling into the 1977 Ford LTD2. Meanwhile, the 460 was gradually withdrawn from mid-size passenger cars altogether, survived in full-size Lincolns and heavy-duty trucks where emissions rules were looser, became symbolic of an era that had passed, power without restraint.
The 1966 Ford Elite with the 460 V8 is now a rarity, especially outside California. In CARB states, finding a legit, original 460 car is extremely difficult, as most were never legally sold or registered. Why it matters today represents the final clash between American muscle excess and environmental regulation, embodies the transition from performance to plushness in the 1970s, offers a snapshot of how manufacturers like Ford had to scramble and regionalize their product offerings based on state-level emissions laws. The 1966 Ford Gran Torino Elite 460 was a car out of time, big, powerful, and luxurious, but unable to adapt to the new automotive realities. California's emission standards choked off its biggest engine and served as a bellwether for the changes to come nationwide. Though quietly dropped, the story of the 460-powered Elite serves as a powerful reminder that the era of unrestricted V8 dominance didn't end with a crash. It ended with a quiet footnote in a dealer order sheet.
Number 6. As the 1970s drew to a close, General Motors, like the rest of Detroit, faced mounting pressure from fuel economy standards, emissions regulations, and rising gas prices. The response? A wave of diesel-powered passenger cars, led in part by the 1980s Chevrolet Caprice Classic Diesel. What could have been a smart fuel saver for full-size American car buyers instead became a case study in mechanical failure, poor planning, and government rejection, especially in cold weather and high-altitude regions. The Caprice nameplate had long stood for full-size comfort, smooth ride quality, V8 power, and traditional American luxury. By 1980, the Caprice had been downsized slightly, starting in 1977, but it remained a staple of suburban driveways and police fleets. Chevrolet needed to make the big sedan more fuel efficient, and diesel power, at least in theory, seemed like a smart option. For the diesel Caprice, GM borrowed the infamous 5.7-liter V8 diesel, engine code LF9, developed by Oldsmobile. Specs: 1980 5.7-liter diesel V8, 105 horsepower at 3,200 RPM, 205 pound-foot of torque at 1,600 RPM, indirect fuel injection, compression ratio circa 22.5 to 1, no turbocharging, paired with 3-speed automatic transmission. The diesel offered better EPA-rated fuel economy than the gasoline V8s, promising up to 30 miles per gallon on the highway, which was impressive for a full-size sedan. But the diesel engine was based heavily on an existing gasoline small-block V8, modified to run on diesel. Unfortunately, GM cut corners. Weak head bolts led to warped cylinder heads and blown head gaskets. Poor fuel injection timing caused hard starts, especially in cold weather. No pre-chamber glow plug system refinement, leading to long warm-up times. The engine lacked the robustness of a true diesel block and suffered from internal failures. Low-sulfur diesel fuel wasn't widely available in the U.S. yet, causing additional lubrication problems. By 1980, it became clear the diesel Caprice had major reliability issues, and regulators in certain states took notice. Key areas where the diesel Caprice was effectively blacklisted. Cold weather states like Minnesota, North Dakota, and parts of Canada reported chronic cold start issues, even with block heaters. High-altitude regions, Colorado, Utah, etc., experienced stalling, emissions failures, and performance degradation due to air density mismatches and poor tuning. In these regions, state emissions programs discouraged registration or denied smog certification altogether. Some government fleet contracts refused delivery or returned diesel Caprices, citing non-compliance. Although never officially banned nationwide, in practice, dealers were told not to sell diesel Caprices in certain zip codes, effectively regionally banning them from major markets. The diesel Caprice's problems weren't just theoretical. Real-world complaints flooded in. Massive warranty claims, premature engine failure, many before 40,000 miles, tarnished GM's reputation, angry customers who expected diesel reliability and instead got towing bills and lawsuits. By 1981, GM attempted minor fixes: stronger head bolts, better glow plug system, tighter machining tolerances.
But the damage was done. Most buyers had lost faith in GM diesels, and Caprice sales began to slide. Today, the 1980 Caprice diesel is an automotive oddity. Survivors are extremely rare, largely because few were sold and most were scrapped. Diesels were avoided in colder states, and survivors are often found only in warmer climates. Some enthusiasts seek them for novelty or low-mileage rarity, but parts and support are scarce. The 1980 Chevrolet Caprice Classic Diesel was born out of legitimate concerns, fuel economy, emissions, and regulations, but its execution was deeply flawed. Instead of being a breakthrough, it became an embarrassment. It failed to meet performance and emissions promises. It was rejected in key states and climates. It soured the market on diesel passenger cars in the US for decades. The lesson? Engineering shortcuts can't replace proper design, especially when public trust and regulatory approval are on the line.
Number 5. The late 1970s were not kind to performance vehicles. Rising gas prices, the OPEC oil crisis, and increasingly strict emissions regulations had nearly wiped out the muscle car. But Dodge found a clever loophole. Pickup trucks weren't held to the same emission standards as passenger cars. Enter the Lil Red Express truck, Dodge's rebellious answer to the muscle car drought. But its fun didn't last long, especially not in California. The Lil Red Express, introduced in 1978 and continued into 1979, was part of Dodge's adult toys lineup, bold, performance-oriented trucks marketed to younger buyers. Key features: 1979 model. Based on the Dodge D150 short bed pickup. 360 CID V8 E58 police spec engine. Dual vertical chrome exhaust stacks behind the cab. Wood trim panels on the bed. Special graphics, gold wheels, and red paint. Heavy-duty suspension and axle. Automatic transmission only. Despite its flashy looks, the Lil Red was a genuine performer. 0 to 60 miles per hour in under 7 seconds. Quarter-mile times that rivaled Corvettes and Trans Ams of the time. In 1978, it was the fastest American-made vehicle tested by Car and Driver, and it was a truck. Here's the twist. Passenger cars were held to strict emissions rules and horsepower choking equipment. But Dodge realized that light-duty trucks hadn't yet caught up to those restrictions. So they fitted the 1978 and early 1979 Lil Red Express with high-flow dual exhaust, no catalytic converters, modified intake and camshaft, tuned carburetor for performance. The result? A truck that could outrun most sports cars on the road while looking like a Hot Wheels toy. California, always the leader in air quality and environmental legislation, wasn't having it. The California Air Resources Board, CARB, enforced tougher emissions rules than the federal government, and the Lil Red Express failed to comply. Key reasons for the ban in California. The 360 V8 lacked required emissions controls like EGR systems and catalytic converters. The dual vertical exhausts bypassed muffling and were too loud. California had already imposed stricter standards for trucks under 6,000 pounds. The engine tuning was deemed non-compliant for hydrocarbon and NOx emissions. As a result, the 1979 Dodge Lil Red Express was banned from sale in California. Dealers couldn't order it, and Dodge didn't even bother to certify it in the state. That meant no buyers from Los Angeles, San Francisco, or anywhere else in America's most populous state. The 1979 version of the Lil Red Express saw some changes to try and keep it legal elsewhere. Catalytic converters were added for federal compliance. Lower compression, reduced performance slightly. New quad headlights due to redesigned front fascia. But even with those updates, California's stricter rules still barred the truck from entry. So, while the truck was sold in 49 states, it remained a no-go in California, and this limited its reach and legacy.
Despite its short run and regulatory struggles, the Lil Red Express left a big impression. Only 5,118 units were built in 1978, roughly 5,118 more in 1979, but none went to California. It remains one of the first modern factory performance trucks. It inspired later trucks like the Chevy 450 SS, Ford Lightning, and Ram SRT-10. Collectors love it for its wild styling and rarity, and clean California-registered examples from out of state are extremely rare. The 1979 Dodge Lil Red Express was loud, fast, and unapologetically brash. It existed because Dodge found a way to bend the rules, but in California, the rules bent back. The truck's ban in the Golden State is a reminder that clever loopholes can only go so far. Environmental regulation has long shaped the car industry. Even icons can be killed by red tape. But in the hearts of gearheads, the Lil Red Express lives on, an outlaw muscle truck that burned bright, burned loud, and burned out fast.
Number 4. By 1970, the American muscle car was entering its twilight. Insurance companies were growing nervous, emissions regulations were looming, and gas prices were beginning to rise. For Mercury, the performance flagship was the Cougar Eliminator, especially when equipped with the monstrous 428 Cobra Jet V8. But this feral predator was too wild to survive the changing automotive ecosystem. Within a year, both the Eliminator trim and the big block 428 were gone, leaving behind only echoes of what once was. The Mercury Cougar, introduced in 1967, was originally marketed as a gentleman's Mustang, a slightly longer, more refined pony car with upscale styling and comfort. However, by 1969-1970, Mercury wanted to compete in the muscle car arena, and thus created the Cougar Eliminator, a visual and performance package that transformed the Cougar into a street machine. Key visual features of the Eliminator: blacked-out grille with body color surround, bold graphics and racing stripes, rear spoiler and front air dam, high-back bucket seats and rally instrumentation, bright colors like competition orange and grabber blue. At the top of the engine list for the 1970 Cougar Eliminator was the 428 Cobra Jet V8. Engine specs: displacement 428 cubic inches, 7.0 liters. Power output 335 horsepower, underrated, with massive torque. 0 to 60 miles per second, 6 seconds. Quarter mile, simulated 13.8 seconds with drag pack and 430 gears. With the optional ram air and drag pack, buyers could also get an oil cooler, a Detroit locker differential, upgraded axles, and heavy-duty cooling. In reality, the Cobra Jet made closer to 400-plus horsepower, and the Eliminator could hang with anything from a Chevelle SS 454 to a Hemi Cuda. Despite its capabilities, the 1970 Cougar Eliminator 428 entered a market that was already beginning to turn on performance cars. The Clean Air Act of 1970 was signed that year. Automakers had to begin preparing for stricter smog regulations. The high-compression big block V8s were first on the chopping block. The 428 was considered too dirty and inefficient. Insurers began penalizing cars with big engines, multiple carbs, or performance options. The 428 Cobra Jet, especially with the drag pack, triggered sky-high premiums for young buyers. Many people couldn't afford to insure the car, even if they could buy it. Buyers began shifting toward comfort and fuel economy. The Cougar's image was increasingly split, half muscle car, half luxury cruiser, and that diluted its market appeal. By 1971, Mercury canceled the Eliminator package entirely. Only the Cougar XR7 trim remained, and while a few performance-oriented options were still available, none packed the punch of the 428 Cobra Jet.
The engine itself was retired, replaced by less aggressive options like the 429 CJ and later the 351 Cleveland. But emissions and detuning had already taken their toll. 1970 was the final year. Last year for the Eliminator. Last year for the 428 Cobra Jet in a Cougar. Only 2,267 Eliminators were built in 1970, and fewer than 500 had the 428 CJ. Today, the 1970 Mercury Cougar Eliminator 428 is a highly sought-after classic among muscle car collectors, particularly with original drag pack, matching numbers, factory ram air setup. But compared to its Mustang Mach 1 cousin, it remains underrated, partly due to its Mercury badge and partly due to its brief lifespan. The 1970 Cougar Eliminator 428 represented the last full-throated roar of Mercury performance before regulations, insurance, and market realities declawed the brand's muscle ambitions. It had the power, it had the looks, but it came just a little too late. Like many muscle cars of the era, it became a victim of its own excess, a car too powerful for the new world that was rapidly unfolding.
Number 3. In the early 1970s, the American automotive industry was facing seismic shifts. The 1973 oil crisis had just struck. Emissions and safety regulations were becoming more aggressive. Yet Chrysler's flagship luxury sedan, the 1974 New Yorker BRM, remained defiantly enormous, both in size and engine. At the heart of this giant sat the legendary 440 cubic inch, 7.2-liter V8, a big block symbol of brute force and opulence. But in California, home to the most stringent air quality regulations in the nation, this power plant would soon be outlawed. It marked the beginning of the end for Chrysler's biggest and baddest V8s. The New Yorker BRM was Chrysler's top-tier luxury sedan, positioned above the Newport and offering Lincoln and Cadillac levels of comfort and scale. Wheelbase, 124 inches. Overall length, 231.9 inches, a true road yacht. Weight, some 5,000 pounds. Interior, plush velour or brocade upholstery, power everything, faux wood galore. Styling, hidden headlights, massive grille, and a padded vinyl roof. This car was all about presence, the kind that occupied 2 parking spaces and a full block of curb. The New Yorker's standard engine was the 440 CID V8, a motor once associated with Chrysler's muscle legends like the GTX and Charger RT. 1974 440 V8 specs, high compression version. Horsepower, some 275 horsepower, net after SAE revisions. Torque, some 375 pound-foot. Carburetor, 4-barrel. Compression ratio, dropped to around 8.2 to 1 for emissions. Transmission, 3-speed TorqueFlite automatic. While emissions and detuning had already robbed it of some former glory, the 440 still delivered immense torque and smooth cruising power. In a straight line, the New Yorker BRM could still hustle, but it drank fuel like an aircraft carrier. California was at the forefront of emissions regulations in the 1970s, having established the California Air Resources Board, CARB, back in the 60s. By 1974, smog regulations were tightening drastically, especially around hydrocarbons and nitrogen oxides. The engine lacked sufficient emissions equipment to meet CARB's new standards. Chrysler refused to invest in expensive catalytic converters or EGR systems for this model in 1974. As a result, the New Yorker BRM 440 was not certified for sale or registration in California. Dealers in California either had to offer detuned smaller engines like the 400 or 360, or not sell the BRM 440 at all. This restriction was more than just a bureaucratic footnote. California represented one of the largest car markets in the U.S. Losing access to it was a serious blow. The 440 Brougham sold well in the rest of the country, but became almost non-existent on the West Coast. Collectors today rarely find California-registered 1974 400s. They simply weren't allowed. Chrysler began accelerating its shift to smaller engines and catalytic converters for 1995. By 1975, all cars sold in California were required to have catalytic converters and unlead fuel systems. The old-school big blocks with their high emissions and thirst for lead gas were rapidly phased out or heavily neutered. For Chrysler, the New Yorker Brougham continued, but with lesser engines. The 440 V8 would limp on in police and RV applications, but not as a premium luxury option in California. The era of Chrysler's massive, unapologetic luxury sedans was effectively over. Today, the 1974 New Yorker Brougham 440 is a rare and nostalgic throwback to the final days of unrestricted luxury and performance. While it was outsold and outshined by its Cadillac and Lincoln rivals, it retains a cult following among Mopar fans for its size, style, and torque-rich V8. In California, however, its story was cut short, a victim of cleaner air and regulatory change. The 1974 Chrysler New Yorker Brougham 440 represents a fascinating moment in automotive history, a dinosaur staring down a comet named CARB. As emissions regulations tightened, cars like this simply couldn't survive without significant re-engineering. It was too big, too thirsty, and too dirty for the future. But for a brief, shining moment, in 49 states anyway, it was the undisputed king of the road.
Number 2. The early 1970s were the twilight years of the American muscle era, and no brand knew how to combine brute force with luxury quite like Buick. In 1973, Buick unveiled what would be one of its last true performance coupes, the Riviera GS Stage 1. It was a car of contradictions, enormous and elegant, but ferocious under the hood. Yet almost as soon as it appeared, it vanished. The culprit? A perfect storm of emissions laws, fuel economy standards, and changing buyer tastes, particularly in California, where the car was practically banned outright. The 1973 Riviera was the final year of the wild, controversial boat tail design that debuted in 1971. Styled under Bill Mitchell and Jerry Hirschberg, it featured a sloping fastback rear end and exaggerated curves, a throwback to classic Auburn Cord Duesenberg influences. Sweeping rear window and deck lid reminiscent of speedboats. Hidden headlamps in the front bumper. Long sculpted fenders and a broad stance. Deluxe interior with power everything and wood grain trim. The GS package gave it a more aggressive look and feel, but it was the Stage 1 engine that really made it roar. At the heart of the GS Stage 1 sat Buick's 455 cubic inch big block V8, tuned for maximum torque and brutal mid-range performance. Displacement, 455 cubic inch, 7.5 liters. Horsepower, 270 horsepower. Torque, 390 plus pounds-foot. Carburetor, Rochester Quadrajet 4-barrel. Camshaft and valve train, high lift cam, heavier springs. Compression ratio, approximately 8.5 to 1. What made the Stage 1 unique was how it delivered torque almost instantly, a trait that made this heavy car feel far more agile than it looked. Paired with a heavy-duty TH400 automatic and posi-traction rear, the GS Stage 1 could smoke its tires well into second gear. Despite weighing over 4,700 pounds, the Riviera GS Stage 1 could sprint from 0 to 60 miles per hour in under 8 seconds, blow past slower luxury coupes like the Monte Carlo and Thunderbird, cruise at 120 miles per hour with shocking stability. This wasn't just a stylish personal coupe, it was Buick's final muscle car hiding behind opera windows. Unfortunately for the Riviera GS Stage 1, the timing couldn't have been worse.
By 1973, California's emissions laws had become the most restrictive in the U.S., and new federal fuel economy pressures were also mounting after the OPEC oil crisis. High hydrocarbon and NOx output. Even with lower compression and tuning changes, the Stage 1 455 couldn't pass CARB's evolving emission standards. Horrific fuel economy. Real-world mileage hovered around 8 to 10 mph, a non-starter post-oil crisis. No catalytic converters yet. Buick would add CATs in 1975, but in 1933, it couldn't easily retrofit the GS Stage 1 with compliant emissions gear. Insurance premiums skyrocketed. The GS badge and Stage 1 options triggered high-risk surcharges from insurers, pricing out buyers. As a result, California dealers refused to order it, and Buick pulled the Stage 1 option entirely after 1973, not just in California, but across the U.S. The 1973 Riviera GS Stage 1 is a one-year-only unicorn. Total 1973 Riviera production, approximately 34,000. Estimated GS Stage 1 production, fewer than 1,200 units. California legal GS Stage 1s, likely zero. Today, it's among the rarest Buick performance cars of the 1970s, often overshadowed by the Grand Sport and later GNX, but deserving of more recognition. After 1973, Buick's Riviera would abandon performance in favor of cushier ride quality, electronic gimmicks, and opera lighting. The GS badge disappeared. The 455 motor remained for a short while, but in severely neutered form. It wasn't until the turbocharged Regal Grand National and GNX of the 1980s that Buick would rediscover its performance heritage. But those were radically different cars with smaller engines and a very different ethos. The 1973 Riviera GS Stage 1 was the last of the big ones. A final defiant roar before the muffler of regulation silenced Detroit's V8 thunder. The 1973 Buick Riviera GS Stage 1 was a masterclass in overbuilt American performance luxury, wrapped in one of the most daring designs ever to wear the Buick badge. It was killed not by lack of demand, but by California smog laws, the collapse of cheap gas, insurance paranoia, GM's corporate caution. Today, survivors are sought after by collectors, especially with documentation proving factory status. It's a car that deserves to be remembered, because it marked the very moment when muscle luxury coupes went extinct.
Number 1. The 1969 Plymouth Belvadier I-426 Hemi is one of the most legendary names in muscle car history. A car built primarily to dominate the drag strip and NASCAR circuits. However, its story is as much about what it couldn't be as what it was. A factory lightweight muscle car hampered by crash safety and emissions regulations, making it almost impossible to legally drive on public roads. The Belvadier I was Plymouth's stripped-down, bare-bones trim level designed for racers and enthusiasts who wanted performance without the luxury trappings. Target audience: drag racers, NASCAR teams, and hardcore muscle fans. Key feature: weight reduction and a no-frills approach. Chassis: strong A-body platform. Interior: minimalist, often with stripped seats and no carpeting. Purpose: maximize straight-line speed and acceleration. At the core was the 426 cubic inch Hemi V8, Chrysler's legendary hemispherical combustion chamber engine renowned for brute force and reliability. Horsepower: rated at 425 horsepower gross, but actual power was believed to be higher. Torque: 490 pound-feet, providing immense pulling power. Carburation: dual 4-barrel carbs in race trim. Compression: high, requiring premium fuel. Reputation: the elephant engine for its size and power. The Belvadier I-426 Hemi was further lightened with fiberglass or aluminum components replacing steel parts. Minimal interior trim, often bare metal floors.
plexiglass or lightweight glass windows, deletion of non-essential accessories. This made it faster and more agile on the drag strip, but compromised comfort, safety, and legal road use. Despite its race-winning capabilities, the Belvadier I-426 Hemi faced nearly insurmountable legal barriers. Crash safety regulations. Lightweight parts and stripped interiors did not meet federal crashworthiness standards. Plexiglass windows and fiberglass panels were not approved for street safety. Lack of full interior trim raised occupant protection concerns. Emissions controls. The Hemi engine was designed for maximum performance with no emissions equipment. It did not meet the tightening federal and California smog regulations. Catalytic converters and exhaust controls were not fitted, making it illegal for street use in many areas. DOT and state registration. Many states refused to register these cars for street use. The combination of weight reduction and lack of emissions gear made them effectively off-road or competition-only vehicles. As a result, the factory lightweight Belvadier I-426 Hemi was a rare breed. Production numbers were very low, primarily limited to racing teams. Many were sold as track use only or as competition specials. Few were ever titled for street use, and those that were had to be heavily modified. This rarity has made surviving examples extremely valuable to collectors. Though nearly banned from public roads, the Belvadier I-426 Hemi made a huge impact in motorsports. Dominated drag strips nationwide, setting numerous records. Helped Plymouth and Chrysler claim NASCAR victories. Established the Hemi as a performance icon. Inspired countless replicas and homage cars for enthusiasts. But its legal status created a mystique, the muscle car too hot for the street, known more for what it could do than what it did on public roads. The 1969 Plymouth Belvadier I-426 Hemi remains a symbol of muscle car excess pushed to the edge. It was built for speed, not compromise. Its factory lightweight construction and raw power made it a drag racing terror. But federal safety and emissions regulations kept it from being a true street machine. Today, it is cherished as a rare race-bred icon, a reminder of a muscle car era where horsepower often ran ahead of bureaucracy.